side, I see the born of no return. It's just ahead now, it's just ahead now. Can't you see we're rushing for the end? I see the point of no return. Now see the point of no return. It's just ahead.
Well, good evening. It's Monday, December 9th already, 2013. And by George, I was a little paranoid, checked my audio feed, headed back to the Rents Radio network, and darn if it doesn't look like it's actually working tonight. Isn't that a pleasant change from last week when I had to sit here with a telephone stuck to my head to get the audio? Hey, technology's great when it works, isn't it? Well, in any case, it's Monday again, 8 o'clock in the evening here on the East Coast, actually a few minutes after with all those commercials. My name is Gary Hendershot, and for about the next hour, I'm going to be barking at the moon, as if anybody out there was really listening. Well, I guess the hot item for many, particularly those on the east coast of the United States, is this wild and crazy storm front that came through. Here's some of the highlights. Let's see here. The massive winter storm that left parts of the southeastern United States in a deep freeze pushed up the east coast overnight on Sunday. You betcha. More than 1,300 flights for Monday have already been canceled. I guess this was a Sunday news item out of the Daily Mail. You know, it's wild when you got to go all the way to the UK to get decent reporting on a fairly local event. Let's see. The winter storm that moved towards the east coast Sunday caused a foot of snow to fall in Newark, Delaware. Parts of the east coast from Virginia to New York could get a quarter-inch of ice. Now, I'm kind of right in the middle of that area. I'm located just outside of Washington, D.C. I can tell you we had a little snowfall. I mean, it was nothing major. We had a little bit of ice on the roads. But funny thing about the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area is things go a little crazy on the roads, even if there's a little bit of fog. So, you know, just that little bit of snow we got had people driving like idiots out there. I guess folks in northern climates where they're more accustomed to a little bit of snow on the ground probably would have had no problem navigating the little bit that we got here in the Washington metropolitan area. Let's see here. Icy weather created a fatal crash in Pennsylvania, which resulted in a deadly 50-car pileup. Wow. Didn't see anything like that around here. You know, we had people sliding off the road and dead-ending people and so on, but no 50-car pileups that I'm aware of, not in the Washington area. Deadly sheet ice falls from apartments in Texas. Texas. Now, you would think Texas would be spared nasty weather, but apparently ice sheets fell from apartments in Texas and destroyed a number of automobiles. Interesting. New York, Washington, and New England could experience huge travel delays as the massive winter storm that left southeastern parts of the nation buried under more than a foot of snow continues its route north, already canceling 5,500 flights. Wow. Forecast for Monday remained up in the air. Let's see here. Well, it's quite an extensive report. If you're interested, I'll go ahead and post the link to this Daily Mail article. It'll probably be outdated by tomorrow. It's relevant right now. So how was it in your area? What did it look like for you? You know, were you one of those who were spared, or were you right in the middle of it? You know, for those who are watching the video feed, I'm showing a picture right now. This was snapped up in Michigan. Looks like some pretty dismal traveling weather. I'm not sure I'd want to be moving around in that. And once again, for the folks who are watching the video feed, I've got a picture right now of the White House at about noon today, and you know, you can still see green grass. You know, a little bit of snowfall. It was cold enough that, you know, there was some ice accumulation on the road, but here in the Washington metropolitan area, it was pretty easy going. But I can tell you that the weather forecasters are telling us that we might get as much as a 6-foot snowfall overnight. So it might be real exciting when we get up in the morning and take a look outside. Then again, considering how accurate weather forecasts are, I may just unpack my Bermuda shorts and get on my sunglasses and tanning oil out, you know, because it'll probably be 90 degrees and sunny. You know, kind of a sad report has come out of, I think I misspoke. Somebody in the chat room says, "Did you really say 6 feet?" I'm sorry, I did misspeak. They are suggesting that we might get as much as 6 inches between now and tomorrow. I can tell you that, you know, 6 inches in the Washington metropolitan area would absolutely cripple this area. I mean, you know, it would, you know, some places up north, 6 inches, they don't even close the schools. You know, the kids walk to school in 6 inches of snow. Around here, yeah. Another report, you know, this comes out of a blog called freedominourtime.blogspot.com. It's an article written by a fellow who has been a guest on Wide Awake News a few times, a fellow by the name of William Grigg. He keeps a pretty nice blog. Some of his articles are very thoughtful, very concise, and I definitely wanted to give him a plug on this particular one. There has been a very unfortunate incident in Iceland where a policeman of Iceland was involved in an officer-involved shooting that resulted in a death. The fatal police shooting of a 59-year-old Icelandic man on December 2nd was the first to take place in that country since it achieved independence in 1944. How about that? In Iceland, police are mourning the unprecedented shooting death of a suspect. Police are stunned and grieving because officers took a human life. Police officers involved are being offered grief counseling. Contrast that with the United States. And that is the message that Mr. Grigg puts across. Following an officer-involved shooting in the United States, the department will typically place the shooter on paid vacation and erect an information barricade to prevent public disclosure of critical facts. It will also quietly leak whatever damaging information about the victim it can find in order to reinforce the presumption that any use of lethal force by police is justified. You know, all too often, that seems to be how it's handled here in the United States. And why average Americans find that to be an acceptable situation, I don't know. Now, maybe it's my naivete. You know, I grew up as a kid watching, black and white television episodes of Andy of Mayberry. And I always assumed that, that's how the cops operate, All cops out there are like Andy. They're peace officers. They're just there to maintain the peace. The violence is an absolute last resort, and only would deadly force be used if there was a threat to someone else's life. I mean, the deputy sheriff, Barney, he was issued one bullet, but he had to keep it in his shirt pocket, so he had to really stop and think about it before he could actually use it. That's kind of what we grew up expecting from law enforcement back in the day. Well, that day's long past. And nowadays, it just seems all too common for the police to use deadly force in any condition where they might possibly, just potentially, maybe, could justify it. Is that what you want from your police? There was a report that came out of a website called police1.com. Now this website focuses on the all-important issue of officer safety. Police1.com. Police1, all one word, .com. You might just want to cruise over there. I mean, you might want to cruise over there and take a look at the type of psychology that is being promoted to police in the United States. They described an incident in a western city of roughly 50,000 population in which a training officer and a recent recruit confronted a suicidal man during a domestic disturbance. When the man approached the officers carrying a shotgun and a handgun, they took up defensive positions behind the door of their car and ordered him to stop. After he came within a few feet of the car, the training officer doused him with pepper spray and took him into custody without any additional injury. That seems like a sensible response, right? Many of this officer's comrades on the police force were impressed with this genuinely heroic act and urged that he be nominated for a Medal of Valor. The police chief, on the other hand, moved quickly to contain this outbreak of decency. When that proposal came to my desk, I thought, that's crazy. It'd be a dangerous precedent to set. Instead, I advocated that he be disciplined, sent to mandatory training, and removed from the field training program. I was adamant that my officers not be afraid or hesitant to shoot when the situation warrants. By my analysis, it did in this situation. So this fella, this cop, who acted like we would expect a cop to act, should face discipline? Interesting. Maybe those cops in Iceland need to do like the cops here in the U.S. do. You know, maybe they need to get sent over to Israel for some sensitivity training and some anti-terrorist training, you know, because obviously, you know, guys like this just, you know, these Icelandic cops, they just don't understand law enforcement, apparently. That's really kind of sad. By the way, you know, this guy here, you know, again, you know, for the radio listeners, I've got a picture of a policeman up there who received a Medal of Valor. This is from Henrico County, very near me here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Apparently shot an unarmed man who in some way, you know, threatened him and received a Medal of Valor for it. I'm sure, you know, he's a nice guy. He's probably got a wife and kid and a mortgage like everybody else out there. And I'm sure that this fella who had nothing more deadly in his hand than a cell phone, I'm sure represented a real threat to him. And that's why he saw fit to end that man's life. Cop. Used to mean citizens on patrol. Okay? Cop. Citizens on patrol. They were citizens, just like you, just like me. They patrolled the streets on behalf of the community. They did what was right to maintain the peace. Today, in the United States of America, what used to be your cops are now revenue enforcement officers who are there to be a profit center for their jurisdiction, to make sure that every time they have a confrontation with the public, it is to collect revenue, and if there is any hesitation on the part of that citizen to dispense with revenue, they're told that they will be made an example of, so that the next one they come in contact with says, yes, sir, kisses his boots, and just pays the fine. They wish to scare and intimidate you. And the acceptance of the use of excessive violence is their means. What do you think? Have they succeeded with you? Consider. Make up your own damn mind. I think I'm coming up on a break in a couple of minutes here, but I want to get through this piece. Over at intrepidreport.com, there's a very interesting article by a fellow I know, a fellow named Larry Pinkney. Hell of a nice guy, very thoughtful. He and I don't agree on everything, frankly. You know, from my point of view, Larry's leans a little towards the socialist bend, but then again, so does Webster Tarpley, and I still listen to what he has to say. Sometimes he comes out with a very intelligent point of view on a topic. Larry's just published an article over at intrepidreport.com, and it's Barack Obama's de facto totalitarian nation. He starts out with a quote from a source you might not remember, those of you who aren't quite as old as I am. But the quote goes like this: when fascism comes to America, it will come wrapped in an American flag. An interesting quote. An interesting quote. And it seems that it doesn't matter whether we got a Democrat or Republican in the White House. Doesn't seem to matter whether we got a Democrat or Republican running the Congress. They are wrapping our rapid decline into fascism in the American flag. It's for God and country and to keep you safe and secure. You know who said that? A fellow by the name of Huey P. Long. He was one of the head organizers of the Black Panther Party back in the day. Say what you will about Huey Long. He was right. We've seen it. He called it. You get to live with the results. All right. Where's that break music? I thought I timed that one perfectly. I guess I'll read you just a paragraph here from my friend Larry Pinkney. As the year 2013 approaches its conclusion, it is more obvious than ever before that the United States is a corporate-owned de facto totalitarian nation. It is, in reality, a 21st century fascist state under the auspices of Barack Obama and his Democrat and Republican cohorts. And I'm hearing the music now. Time for me to bow out of here for a couple minutes while we try and sell some product and pay the bills. I'll be right back. And we're back from the blatantly commercial announcements that keep the lights burning at the studio. I hope you all paid attention to those messages and bought one of each item that's offered. And moving right along here, you know, just suppose that you were involved in a business enterprise that had a revenue stream in excess of $100 billion a year. Wow. You know, talk about dreaming, you know. Well, would you be in support of anything that might threaten that revenue stream? What do you think? I mean, put yourself in that position. You know, you're the CEO of a big outfit, and maybe your piece of that more than $100 billion a year, maybe your piece of the action, maybe, you know, a couple $100 million, you know. And you look at your industry and you think, oh my goodness, you know, this thing over here, this might threaten my piece of the action. Even though it might be better for humanity. What would you do? Well, let's just take, for example, cancer. Woohoo, cancer. How did that get in the mix? We're talking about, you know, enterprises, and you're thinking big corporations, and I bet you thought I was going to talk about the oil industry or you know, one of those evil conglomerates. But cancer, I mean, golly gee whiz, cancer? But yeah, think about it. Cancer, in the United States at least, I don't know how it is in a country where you live, but here in the United States, cancer is big business. The revenue stream directly related to cancer is well in excess of $100 billion with a B dollars a year. Now, if you were the CEO of a big company that was involved in producing chemotherapy or radiation therapy equipment, or maybe, you know, you're the CEO of a outfit that owns some cancer treatment centers, would you really want a cure for cancer? Or would it be in your best interest to, instead of seeking a cure, just make sure your patents are up to date on your latest patentable treatment for cancer. If there was ever a cure found for cancer, an industry that's worth more than $100 billion a year would be at risk. It would be a direct threat to that industry. Consequently, at least in the United States, there will never be a cure for cancer brought to the market. It'd be anti-American. It would kill an entire industry. Do you understand how many good-paying jobs would be lost if cancer was easily cured? Why, that's a threat to U.S. national security. Such a thing would probably be droned. We'd pass a law against it. Kind of like marijuana. But, yeah, you must be crazy. A cure for cancer? No. What you mean is some new drug to treat the symptoms, to make the person productive for the last few years of their life before cancer takes them out. That's what you mean, right? Because, a treatment for the symptoms, we ought to be able to get a bundle for. Right now in the United States of America, at some point during their lives, about 1 in 3 will contract some form of cancer. Now, that's a pretty shocking statistic. What's even more shocking is that 100 years ago, cancer was almost unknown. Every now and then, but very, very rare. Soon, the statistics would indicate that 1 in 2, 50% of Americans will at some point in their lives have to deal with cancer. Why? Why? Use of that evil weed tobacco in the United States has been on the decline since the 1980s. Yet lung cancers continue. It's got to be that secondhand smoke. Yeah, that's got to be it. Let's ban smoking in all the bars. That'll solve the problem. Yeah, that's the ticket. The best way to fight cancer is to do your best not to get it in the first place. Okay? And there are some steps you can take. Do you have carpeting in your home? Are you one of those people that, follow the good housekeeping articles and you think you're just not a good homemaker? You're not making a nice house unless you got brand spanking new plush wall-to-wall carpeting in your home. Do you know that stuff gives off formaldehyde gas? Do you have any idea the chemical cocktail that goes into the materials we use as carpeting? See, back in the old days, they had wood floors. And if you had carpets, they weren't really carpets, they were area rugs, and they were woven out of the same type of materials that people, matter of fact, a lot of the rugs were woven out of discarded clothing. It was, they found these rags laying around. They said, let's take this stuff. We'll make a rug out of it. That's what people used to use to cover their floors. Just something that simple. Avoid exposure to some of these chemical cocktails that have only been introduced to our way of life within the last 100 years or so, that I'm sure everybody thought were going to be perfectly benign and not have any negative impacts. But with 2020 hindsight, we're starting to think that maybe we could learn something from how folks lived a long time ago. How about the foods you eat? I mean, have you ever taken a look at the ingredients on some of the foods you eat? How many items in that box of Wheaties has a name on it that's so long and contorted you can't even pronounce it? Are you eating foods with contents that you can barely read, let alone pronounce? Think about that for a moment. I thought I had timed that just right for the break, and sure enough, I hear the music in the background. I'm going to be back in just a few moments after these commercial announcements, and we'll talk a little bit more about ways you might avoid becoming one of those 1 in 2 that'll have to face cancer during your lifetime. Alrighty, we are back from our last break for the evening. And I really should give a plug to the person who wrote this article about cancer. The name is Daisy Luther, and she writes for a blog called The Organic Prepper.ca. The Organic Prepper, all one word, .ca. And this is from an article that she wrote called "Making a Killing with Cancer." A $124.6 billion industry. She does make some, I think, very valid suggestions as to how we can avoid becoming, right now, that 1 in 3 and soon to become 1 in 2 victims of a pretty scary disease. She makes the argument in her article that much of the cancer that we're seeing nowadays might be environmental, brought upon by our own stupidity and our quest for, an easier, more comfortable, more convenient lifestyle. I mean, take, for example, Teflon cookware. Okay? Take a look in your kitchen. Do you fry your eggs up in the morning in a Teflon pan? Very convenient. Non-stick surface makes them very easy to clean. I mean, shoot, Teflon was invented for the space program to be a lubricant, nice slippery stuff that, you coat something with Teflon, you don't need to lubricate it, so yeah, that's great for bearings and whatever else in outer space where, the lubricant might not dissipate properly because there's no gravity. I mean, I don't know, but apparently, Teflon was very useful in the space program, and I got to thinking about it. Gee, how can we turn this nifty stuff that we've come up with into an even bigger moneymaker? And they came up with, hey, Teflon cookware. Well, it seems Teflon gives off some kind of carcinogen called perfluorooctane. It's got 15 syllables in it that I certainly can't pronounce. Its acronym is PFOA, and this stuff gives off it's a toxic gas that's given off within 5 minutes of heating up that Teflon pan. Something that simple. Something you take for granted every day. It's a modern convenience of life in the civilized world. How about those plastic containers you stash leftovers in? Or, quite often, buy food product in. I mean, they're handy, they're convenient, you don't have to worry about washing them up. You just, when you're done with them, you just throw them away. They wind up in the landfill, and, maybe they will dissolve in 100,000 years or 250,000 years or something like that. But in the meantime, they're giving off chemicals that feminize males. Frankly, some of the stuff, some of the toxic agents that are given off by plastic containers that much of your food is delivered in is scary. It's absolutely scary. Even the lining of your soda pop. You have one every day, right? Some people have 10 or 15 of them every day. You just go to the machine, you put in a few quarters, you get your little soda pop in a aluminum can. Well, guess what? Aluminum doesn't react very well with acids, and most sodas are acidic. So what do? They put a thin plastic liner in the aluminum so that the soda pop will not eat right through that aluminum can. Imagine what it's doing to your guts. But that plastic liner gives off carcinogenic chemicals that you really do not wish to be exposed to. How about personal care items? 100 years ago, let's face it, people stunk. Maybe they took a bath once a week, whether they needed it or not. They didn't use all sorts of perfumey soaps and all that nonsense. And, if they washed their clothes, they probably washed them using a washing board by hand down by the river using some soap they made from pig renderings or whatever. Heavy in the phosphates, yeah. But, not a whole lot of perfumey stuff and not a whole lot of chemical compounds that you can't even pronounce. You can't even begin to pronounce some of this stuff. You would not imagine what is in common personal care products. It would scare you. Something like dioxane. Well, gee, that's one I can actually pronounce. California's passed a law that dioxane has to be removed from any personal care products. So far, they're the only ones. So the land of fruits and nuts has actually gotten something right for a change. Let's see here. Paraffin wax, mineral oil, toluene, benzene, phenolxyethanol. Holy cow. Yeah, all that stuff is in common personal care products. So now when you go and you buy some soap, you buy some laundry detergent, or you just want to buy some bath soap that you might actually be able to apply to your skin without being exposed to some noxious petrochemical, you got to be real careful. You got to read those labels. You got to know what's in some of these products. And of course, the other side of the aisle is going to say, oh, but the government will protect us from that. They wouldn't let big companies put stuff in our soap that's bad for us. They wouldn't let some big company put nonstick coatings on our cookware that might cause cancer. The government would protect us from that, wouldn't they? Wouldn't they? Well, let's go back to Larry Pinkney's article, where he makes a very convincing argument that the United States, if it's not already, is very quickly becoming a fascist state. What is the definition of fascism? It's government and business walking hand in hand in opposition to the interests of the general public. That is what defines fascism. Now, some would say, well, it's only fascism if the government owns the business. And here in the United States, it's the big business that owns the government. So that's capitalism, right? Capitalism, good. Fascism, bad. Oh, come on. That's bullshit, okay? Let's call it a let's call a spade, you know, that sets off the alarms. No. What we have in the United States of America, and unfortunately, a lot of the so-called industrial world probably has the same phenomena going on. What we have is we have government being operated for the sole benefit of big business interests. First and foremost, among them being the financial interests on Wall Street. Now, I've heard all kinds of arguments. Oh, no. It's the tail wagging the dog. Israel runs the United States. Well, you know, come on. You know, sometimes I think the United States runs Israel, and you know they're the, you know, the attack dog for, you know, next week's who we're going to bomb. But yeah, financial interests on Wall Street certainly have their part to play, mainly because they have this thing called intermingled boards of directors where, you know, if you're a big company and you go to Wall Street and you say, hey, you know, we need $1 million to expand our business into this market, they say, no problem. Why don't you put one of our good old boys, you know, this boy over here from Goldman or this boy over here from J.P. Morgan, you know, why don't you put them on your board and, you know, let us keep an eye on our interests. Make sure, you know, our piece of the action is well represented. And then these intermingled boards of directors grow in both power and stature until what you wind up with is you wind up with mega corporations that have enough money so that they can spend more on lobbying the government to protect their business interests than they spend on developing new products to satisfy their market. If you look at most of the major corporations that you know as being American companies, even though nowadays chances are they're offshore somewhere, like, you know, they're in some kind of a tax haven, chances are what you'll see is you'll see more money put into the slush fund to lobby governments around the world than they invest in research and development. Because once you get big enough to where you can have laws passed to force people to buy your product, Obamacare, you don't need to be competitive or try to produce a better widget for less money or, you know, compete against others who might provide. You know, you don't have to get into that nonsense. You just pay off your interested governments to write protectionist laws to make sure that your business does well, regardless of what's happening in the general economy. The passing reference to Obamacare was purposeful, and I hope you caught it. That's what's going on. The insurance industry has bought that piece of business. Well, that's it for me tonight. I'm done barking at the moon for this Monday. I'll see you next week. Y'all have a good week now.
What will turn, turn, won't you turn around? Oh, the point of no return is just ahead now.